I watched my sister's face drain of color as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Victoria Vance, the golden child, the rising star of the State Department, was being arrested for espionage at the NATO defense gala in Paris. And I was the one who turned her in. 3 years ago. She destroyed my military career and stole everything from me. Tonight, dressed as a server with a recording device hidden on my uniform, I just returned the favor. As security dragged her past me, she locked eyes with mine and hissed one question. How I smiled for the first time in 3 years. You taught me well. Sister, never underestimate your competition. But let me tell you something before I continue. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever had your life destroyed by someone who should have protected you, then this story is for you. Please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of justice and redemption. And drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my shoes. Your support means everything. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. Because the road to that moment in Paris started 3 years earlier on the worst day of my life. My name is Chloe Vance. Though for the past 3 years I've gone by Bernice Harper. 3 years ago, I was Lieutenant Chloe Vance, a linguistic intelligence analyst for the United States Air Force, specializing in NATO communications. I spoke 7 languages fluently, had been decorated twice for my service, and was being fast-tracked for a promotion to captain. I loved my job with a passion that bordered on obsession. Every intercepted transmission I decoded, every threat I helped neutralize. I felt like I was making a real difference in the world. I remember the day it all came crashing down with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday morning in October, unseasonably warm for Washington, D.C. I had just finished a briefing on French defense communications when 2 OSI agents appeared at my office door. Office of Special Investigations. My stomach dropped even before they said a word. Their faces were stone, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. Lieutenant Vance, you need to come with us. The next 6 hours were a blur of interrogation rooms, accusations, and evidence I couldn't begin to explain. Classified NATO intelligence reports, marked with my digital signature, had been leaked to defense contractors who weren't authorized to have them. Financial transactions showed payments into an offshore account registered under my social security number. My own signature, my own credentials, used to betray everything I believed in. I protested my innocence until my voice went hoarse. I demanded they check the authentication logs, the timestamps, anything that would prove I hadn't done this. But the evidence was airtight. So airtight, I would later realize. They stripped me of my rank that same day. The formal court-martial came 2 weeks later. A show trial where I sat in dress uniform that suddenly felt like a costume. My defense attorney, a tired captain who'd been assigned to me, barely put up a fight. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. Every piece of evidence pointed to me. My father, a retired Army colonel who'd taught me everything I knew about honor and duty, sat in the back row of that courtroom. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. The verdict was predetermined. Dishonorable discharge. Loss of all benefits. And thanks to a plea deal to avoid prison time. A lifetime of shame. What I didn't know then, what wouldn't become clear for 3 more years, was that my own sister had orchestrated the entire thing. Victoria Vance, 5 years my senior, had always been the golden child. Where I chose military service, she chose diplomacy. She climbed the ranks of the State Department with ruthless efficiency, charming everyone she met while leaving a trail of stepped-on colleagues behind her. Our father, despite his military background, had always favored her. She was elegant where I was direct, political where I was principled. I thought the rivalry between us was just sibling dynamics. I was wrong. After my discharge, I disappeared. I couldn't face my father, couldn't stand the looks of pity or disgust from former colleagues. I changed my name legally to Bernice Harper, sold everything I owned, and moved to a small apartment in a different part of D.C. I needed to survive, so I did the only thing I could think of. I opened a coffee shop. It was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore in a neighborhood where nobody knew my face or my story. I called it the Daily Grind. A bitter joke, only I understood. Every day I ground beans, pulled espresso shots, and smiled at customers who had no idea that the woman serving their lattes used to brief generals on national security threats. The work was mindless, which was exactly what I needed. My hands stayed busy while my mind rotted with questions I couldn't answer. How had someone gained access to my credentials? Who had set me up? Why I spent my nights hunched over my old laptop? The one piece of equipment I'd managed to keep. Searching through old files and communications logs, I taught myself basic hacking, reached out to old contacts who were willing to risk talking to a disgraced officer, but every lead went nowhere. Whoever had framed me had covered their tracks perfectly. Then, 2 years and 8 months after my discharge, Victoria walked into my coffee shop. I saw her through the window before she entered. To her designer coat and confident stride, marking her as someone from a different world than the students and freelancers who usually frequented my shop. My hand froze on the espresso machine. I hadn't seen her since the court-martial, where she'd sat 3 rows behind our father. Her face a mask of sorrowful disappointment. She'd sent a card afterward, a few empty lines about being sorry for what happened and hoping I'd land on my feet. I'd burned it. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. She looked around the shop with barely concealed disdain before her eyes landed on me. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise satisfaction. Then her diplomatic smile slid into place. "Bernice," she said, using my new name with perfect ease. "I heard you were working here. I wanted to stop by." I wiped my hands on my apron slowly, buying time to control the rage that threatened to bubble up. "Victoria, what a surprise." My voice came out flat and cold. She approached the counter, her heels clicking on the worn tile floor. She was immaculate. As always, her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, her makeup subtle and perfect. She wore a silk blouse under that designer coat, and her wrist bore our father's Omega watch, the one he'd promised to give to whoever made him proudest. It had been his father's before him, a symbol of the Vance family legacy. Seeing it on her wrist felt like a knife between my ribs. "I'll have an Americano," she said, placing a $20 bill on the counter. "Keep the change." The condescension in her voice was palpable. She wasn't here for coffee. I made her drink in silence, feeling her eyes on me the entire time. When I handed her the cup, she took it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she pulled a newspaper from her bag and spread it on the counter between us. The headline screamed in bold letters, "NATO Defense Summit in Paris, historic gathering to address global security threats." There was a photo of her standing next to the Secretary of Defense, both smiling for the cameras. "It's next month," she said casually. "I'm heading the American diplomatic delegation. It's quite an honor." She paused, sipping her coffee with theatrical appreciation. "I've come a long way since we were kids." "Haven't I? Remember when you used to correct my French homework?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Now I'm negotiating defense contracts in French with NATO ministers. And you're here making coffee. Life is funny that way." I should have stayed silent. I should have let her have her moment of cruelty and sent her on her way. But something in her tone, something in the way she looked at me, with such pitying superiority, made me snap. "Is there a point to this visit, Victoria, or did you just come here to gloat?" Her smile sharpened. "I came here to make sure you understood your place. Bernice, you had your chance at greatness. You threw it away with your poor choices. I'm simply making sure you don't harbor any delusions about coming back from this." She leaned in closer. "You don't belong in my world anymore. You never really did. I was always the one with the real talent for this work. Father knew it. Everyone knew it. You were just too stubborn to admit it." The words hung between us, each one calculated to wound. But what she didn't see, what her arrogance wouldn't let her see, was that I wasn't the broken woman she thought I was. I'd spent nearly 3 years analyzing my own downfall with the same precision I'd once applied to enemy communications, and in that moment, watching her gloat over my ruin, a piece of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place. The timing of the leak, the specific files that had been compromised, the fact that Victoria had been working in the same department that oversaw some of those contracts. It was circumstantial, barely even a theory, but it was the first real thread I'd had in years. After she left, newspaper still on the counter, I stood there shaking. A few customers looked at me with concern, but I waved them off. I closed the shop early that night, something I'd never done before, and went straight home. My apartment was small and sparse, everything I owned fitting into 2 rooms. But in the closet, hidden under a stack of old uniforms I couldn't bring myself to throw away, was my old laptop. I booted it up and started searching. Victoria's career trajectory, her assignments, the timeline of her rise through the State Department, the defense contractors who'd received the leaked information. I worked through the night, my eyes burning, my fingers flying across the keyboard. By dawn, I had enough to make me sick. Victoria had been working with the Bureau of Defense Analysis 3 years ago. With access to the same classified systems I'd used, she'd been dating Claude Rayo, a defense contractor executive. At the exact time the leaks occurred, their relationship had ended shortly after my court-martial, right around the time Rio's company landed a massive NATO defense contract. The kind of contract that required insider information to bid on successfully, the kind of information that had been in those leaked files. But knowing something and proving it were 2 different things. I had no evidence. No proof. Nothing that would hold up to any scrutiny. I was a disgraced officer with a vendetta against her successful sister. Nobody would believe me. I needed something concrete. Something undeniable. I needed to catch her in the act. That's when I found the envelope. It was slipped under my apartment door sometime during those early morning hours while I'd been lost in my research. A plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside was an invitation to work as a temporary server for the NATO Defense Gala in Paris, provided by the Ambassador Catering Group. The date matched Victoria's summit. The location was the American Embassy. And there was a note, typed on plain paper. In French, "Regardez le dossier." Look at the file. My hands trembled as I turned on my laptop again. There was a new email in my inbox, from an address I didn't recognize. No message. Just an attachment. A compressed file that took 3 minutes to download on my crappy internet connection. When I finally opened it, I had to sit down. It was everything. Personnel records showing Victoria's access to my credentials. Financial transactions linking her to offshore accounts. Communications between her and Claude Rayo discussing the problem and the solution. Screenshots of her accessing my files. Timestamped and authenticated. And most damning of all, a recording of a conversation between Victoria and someone whose voice was too distorted to identify. In it, she talked about needing to eliminate the competition and secure the contract by any means necessary. She mentioned me by name. At the bottom of the file was a single line of text, from a friend who values honor. General Henry Morrow. Ministry of Defense. France. I remembered General Morrow. I'd worked with him on a joint NATO intelligence operation 2 years before my discharge. He'd been impressed with my work, had even written a commendation letter for my file. He'd also been one of the few people who'd reached out after my court-martial. A brief email expressing his disbelief at the charges. I'd been too ashamed to respond. Now he was giving me a lifeline. But why? What did he gain from helping me? I spent the next week in a fog of decision-making. Part of me wanted to take the evidence to the authorities immediately, to clear my name through official channels. But I knew how that would go. The evidence, while compelling, was obtained through what was certainly illegal hacking. It would be dismissed, and Victoria would be alerted. She'd cover her tracks even more thoroughly, and I'd lose my only chance. No, if I was going to do this, I had to be smart. I had to catch her in the act of another crime, one that couldn't be explained away or buried in bureaucracy. That's when I remembered Tom Reyes. Tom had been in the Air Force Cyber Division, a brilliant hacker who'd worked on the periphery of my old department. We'd been friendly, sharing coffee breaks and complaints about the military bureaucracy. After my discharge, he'd been one of the few people who'd reached out, telling me he didn't believe the charges. We'd stayed in touch sporadically, mostly through encrypted messages. I reached out to him now. We met at a park in Arlington, both of us paranoid enough to avoid electronic communications for what I was about to ask. Tom looked the same as I remembered, lanky and perpetually tired, with the kind of beard that said he'd stopped caring about military grooming standards the day he'd retired. He listened to my story without interruption, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You want me to help you go to Paris and spy on your sister during a NATO summit, he said finally. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? Yes, I said simply. But do you believe me? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never believed you were guilty. Chloe, the evidence was too perfect, too neat. I tried to tell people that, but nobody wanted to listen. A scapegoat had been found, and the case was closed. He looked at me directly. If I help you with this, we're both taking a huge risk. If it goes wrong, we're looking at real prison time. I know, I said, and I can't ask you to take that risk, but I have to do this. Tom, I have to prove that I was telling the truth, not just for my career or my record, but because if Victoria gets away with this, she'll do it again. She's probably already doing it again. Someone has to stop her. Tom was quiet for another moment. Then he smiled grimly. Well, I always wanted to see Paris. And honestly, taking down a corrupt diplomat sounds way more interesting than my current job debugging software for a defense contractor. He pulled out his phone. All right, let's do this right. We're going to need equipment, credentials, and a plan. How much time do we have? 3 weeks, I said. 3 weeks to plan an international espionage operation. Great. No pressure, but he was already making notes, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Okay. First, we need to make sure this invitation is legitimate and not a trap. Then we need to figure out what Victoria is planning in Paris. That's worth all this setup. The general wouldn't have reached out if there wasn't something big going down. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom and I worked like we were preparing for a military operation. Because in a way, we were. Tom hacked into the Ambassador Catering Group's databases and confirmed that my invitation was legitimate. More than that, he found that the company was a front used by French intelligence for placing assets at diplomatic events. General Morrow had pulled strings to get me on the list. Tom also discovered that Claude Rayo would be attending the gala, along with several other defense contractors. Victoria was planning something, and Morrow wanted me there to catch her. Tom provided me with equipment. A micro-recording device that looked like a button on my uniform, a nearly invisible earpiece, a modified smartphone that could bypass most security scanners. Most importantly, he set up a secure relay that would let him monitor everything from a hotel room in Paris and provide real-time information. He taught me how to use everything, drilling me until the motions became second nature. The hardest part was getting ready mentally. I hadn't been in a high-pressure operational situation since my discharge. My confidence had been shattered along with my career. But as I practiced, as I planned, something started to wake up inside me. The old Chloe, the analyst who'd thrived under pressure, who'd solved impossible puzzles and outsmarted enemy intelligence agencies. She was still there. She'd just been buried under years of shame and self-doubt. It was time to bring her back. I flew to Paris on a cold November morning. The flight was long and gave me too much time to think. I alternated between absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing and terror that I was about to make everything worse. By the time we landed at Charles de Gaulle, I was exhausted and wired, running on nothing but coffee and determination. Tom had arrived 2 days earlier to set up our operation center. He texted me the address of a small hotel in the Marais district. When I arrived, he had the room set up like a miniature command center. 3 laptops, running various security feeds and monitoring programs. Welcome to Paris, he said, handing me an espresso. Let's go over the plan one more time. The plan was simple in theory, terrifying in practice. I would work the gala as a server, staying close to Victoria and Rayo. Tom would monitor all communications in and out of the embassy, looking for anything suspicious. If we caught them in the act of another transaction, another leak, we'd record everything and send it simultaneously to General Morrow, the OSI, and several trusted journalists. The evidence would be too widespread to bury, but we had to catch them doing something definitively illegal, something that couldn't be explained away. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I met with the catering manager, a thin Frenchman named Philippe who looked at me skeptically when I showed up for training. Your French is very good, he said in French, clearly testing me. Where did you learn? The military, I said simply, also in French. I was a translator. It wasn't exactly a lie. His expression softened slightly. A veteran. Good. We need reliable people for this event. The security will be intense. You'll be subjected to multiple background checks. I trust there are no problems with your record. My new identity as Bernice Harper was clean, created with Tom's help to withstand basic scrutiny. No problems, I said. The day of the gala arrived too quickly. I dressed in the server's uniform, black pants and white shirt with a bow tie, and made my way to the American embassy. The security was indeed intense. I was searched, scanned, and questioned before being allowed inside. Tom's voice crackled in my earpiece. You're clear. I can hear you perfectly. All systems are go. The embassy was transformed. What was normally a functional government building had been turned into something from a movie. All glittering chandeliers and elegant decorations. Staff rushed around, making final preparations, while security personnel took up positions at every entrance. I was assigned to serve drinks during the reception hour, which was perfect. It would give me mobility and access to conversations. As guests began to arrive, I fell into the rhythm of the work. Smile, offer drinks, move quietly through the crowd, be invisible. It was surprisingly easy to disappear into the role of a server. People looked past you, through you, talking freely as if you weren't even there. I caught fragments of conversations about trade negotiations, defense budgets, political maneuvering. The NATO summit was a gathering of some of the most powerful people in the Western world, and they all had agendas. Then I saw Victoria. She entered like she owned the room, dressed in a stunning navy gown that probably cost more than I made in 6 months at the coffee shop. She was accompanied by an older man I recognized as the Deputy Secretary of State. They were immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk to them, to be seen with them. Victoria was in her element, charm and confidence radiating from her like heat. Watching her, it was hard to believe she was capable of the betrayal she'd committed. But I knew better now. Claude Rio arrived 20 minutes later. He was a handsome man in his 50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed. He worked the room like a professional, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. But I noticed how his eyes kept finding Victoria, how he seemed to be positioning himself to cross her path naturally. Tom's voice came through my earpiece. I've got eyes on both of them. Rio's phone just pinged the embassy's secure network. He's accessing something. I moved closer, offering drinks to a group near where Victoria and Rio had finally come together. They greeted each other formally, like casual acquaintances, but I saw the way their hands lingered when they shook. They were more than that. Had been, or still were. I couldn't tell. Their conversation was in French, and they spoke quietly. But I caught words. Transfer. Files. Timeline. My heart raced. This was it. They were planning something for tonight. General Henri Marot arrived fashionably late. As befitting his status, he was a distinguished man in his 60s, his French military uniform decorated with medals earned over decades of service. The crowd parted for him with genuine respect. I watched as he made his rounds, greeting various officials. When his eyes landed on me, there was the briefest flicker of recognition, but he gave no other sign. He knew I was here. He was ready for whatever came next. The dinner service began, and guests moved into the main dining room. I was assigned to serve wine, which meant circulating among the tables. Victoria was seated at the head table with the deputy secretary and several high-ranking NATO officials. Rio was 3 tables away, but positioned where he could see Victoria clearly. Throughout the meal, I watched them. Twice, Victoria excused herself to take phone calls. The second time, Rio followed a few minutes later. Tom's voice was urgent in my ear. They're both in the east corridor. No cameras there. I've lost visual. I abandoned my tray and headed for the corridor, moving quickly but trying not to draw attention. I found them in a small alcove near the embassy's secure communications room. They were standing close together, and Rio was handing Victoria a slim envelope. Everything you need is here, he was saying in English. The access codes, the encryption keys. Once you upload the files from the secure room, I'll have my team ready to receive. We'll be done before anyone notices. And the payment, Victoria asked coldly. Half now. Half when the contract is finalized. Same as last time. Last time, he was talking about the frame-up that had destroyed my life. My hand shook as I pressed the button to start recording on the device Tom had given me. I must have made some sound, because they both turned. For a moment, we all froze. Victoria's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, recognition, calculation. Then her diplomatic mask snapped into place. "Bernice," she said smoothly. "What are you doing here?" I stepped out of the shadows, and I saw her really see me for the first time. Not the broken woman from the coffee shop, but someone else. Someone harder. "What am I doing here? I'm serving drinks." "Victoria. Just like you said. Staying in my place." I looked at Rio, and overhearing very interesting conversations. Rio's hand moved toward his jacket, and I realized he might be armed. But before anything could happen, Tom's voice came through. "Security is moving your way." Someone triggered an alarm. "You need to get back to the main room now." I turned and walked away quickly, my heart pounding. Behind me, I heard Victoria hiss something to Rio in French. They couldn't risk making a scene. Not here. Not now. I made it back to the dining room just as the main course was being cleared. Tom was talking rapidly in my ear. "I got it all. The recording is crystal clear. I'm sending it tomorrow now. And to our backup contacts. Whatever they're planning for tonight. We need to stop it before they access that secure room." I found one of the security officers. A stern American woman who looked like she could break me in half. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I think there's something you should know about two of the guests." She looked annoyed at being interrupted. "This better be important. Someone is planning to access the secure communications room without authorization tonight," I said. Within the next hour, I overheard them discussing it. Her expression changed instantly. "Where who?" I told her what I'd heard, leaving out only the parts that would reveal my own mission. She spoke rapidly into her radio, and within seconds, security was moving. The mood in the room shifted subtly. Guests noticed the increased security presence, the way officers had taken up new positions. Victoria noticed too. I saw her face go pale as a security officer approached her table and asked her to step outside for a moment. That's when things started to fall apart for her. General Morrow stood up and made his way to the deputy secretary, speaking quietly but urgently. The deputy secretary's expression grew stormy. He stood abruptly and followed Morrow out of the room. More security officers appeared. Claude Rayo tried to leave quietly, but he was intercepted at the door. The room was buzzing now, guests whispering and speculating. Tom's voice came through my earpiece, and he was trying not to laugh. "Oh man. Chloe, you should see the chaos you've created." Morrow just played the recording for the deputy secretary. They're reviewing embassy security footage now. Victoria and Rio are being detained for questioning. I set down my wine tray carefully, my hands shaking. After 3 years, after all the planning and hoping, it was actually happening. Victoria was being held accountable, but I needed to see it through. I needed to face her one more time. I made my way to the East Wing where detainees were being held. Security tried to stop me, but General Morrow appeared. "Let her through," he said in French. "She has every right to be here." He turned to me and spoke in English. "Lieutenant Vance? Or should I say, Captain Vance? That is the rank you should have achieved by now. Is it not?" Tears stung my eyes. "Sir, I don't understand. I never believed the charges against you," he said simply. "I have been investigating this case for 2 years. When I discovered evidence that pointed to your sister, I knew I needed your help to prove it. She is clever. Your sister. She covers her tracks well. But she could not resist the temptation of one more score. Thank you for your courage in coming here." He led me to a small conference room where Victoria sat with 2 OSI agents. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Real, genuine fear. The agents stood. "Captain Vance." One of them said, "We need your statement about the events 3 years ago and what you witnessed tonight." Captain Vance? The rank I should have had. The rank I'd earned before it was stolen. I sat down across from Victoria. The agents and General Morrow stepped back, giving us a moment. Victoria stared at me, her perfect composure cracking. How did you know? She whispered. I didn't. Not for sure. Not until you came to my coffee shop to gloat. You couldn't just let me disappear. Could you? You had to rub my face in it. That's when I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, you had something to do with my downfall. I leaned forward. Why? Victoria, why did you destroy my life? For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, her voice barely audible. Because you were everything I wasn't. Father loved you more. Everyone did. You were the golden child who could do no wrong. I worked twice as hard for half the recognition, and when Claude came to me with his plan to get the classified information he needed, I saw an opportunity. A chance to get rid of the competition and make money doing it. 2 birds. 1 stone. She laughed bitterly. I never thought you'd figure it out. I thought you'd just fade away. You stole my father's watch, I said, my voice shaking. You took it right off his wrist after he died. Like you'd earned it. Like you were the one who'd made him proud. Her hand went to the watch on her wrist. I deserved it. I'm the successful one. I'm the one who made something of herself in the real world. Not playing soldier. The casual contempt in her voice finally broke something in me. You're right about one thing, I said. You did make something of yourself. You made yourself a criminal. A traitor. Someone who would betray their own sister and their country for money and ego. I stood up. I hope it was worth it. Victoria, because you're going to have a long time to think about it. The next few hours were a blur of statements, questions, and documentation. The evidence Tom and I had gathered, combined with what Morrow had been collecting, painted an undeniable picture. Victoria had used her position in the State Department to access my credentials and frame me for leaks that she herself had committed. She'd done it to help Claude Rayo's company win defense contracts, receiving substantial kickbacks in return. They'd planned to do it again tonight, selling classified NATO communications to the highest bidder. The recording I'd made gave them everything they needed. By sunrise, formal charges had been filed. Victoria Vance and Claude Rayo were arrested for espionage, fraud, and conspiracy. The Deputy Secretary of State held an emergency press conference, announcing the arrests and promising a full investigation. My name was mentioned as a cooperating witness and as a victim of a gross miscarriage of justice. The words felt hollow after everything I'd been through. But they were a start. 3 days later, I stood in a small office in the Pentagon, surrounded by more brass than I'd ever seen in one room. The Secretary of the Air Force was there. Along with the Judge Advocate General and several other high-ranking officials, they presented me with a formal apology, a reinstatement of my rank as captain, and a commendation for my service. My record was cleared completely. All charge dismissed. My benefits restored. They even offered me my old position back, if I wanted it. I looked at the uniform they'd brought for me, the captain's bars gleaming on the shoulders. Part of me wanted to put it on, to step back into that life and pretend the last 3 years hadn't happened. But I'd learned something important during my exile. I'd learned who I was without the uniform, without the validation of rank and recognition. I'd learned that my worth wasn't tied to what others thought of me, and I'd learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in uniform. Thank you, I said to the secretary, for the apology, for clearing my name. It means more than you know. But I'm not coming back. I have a coffee shop to run. And honestly, I've learned to like my life outside the military. What I want, what I need, is for this to be made public. I want everyone who judged me, who believed I was guilty, to know the truth. That's the only justice that matters to me now. They agreed. A formal statement was released, detailing the conspiracy against me and my role in exposing it. The story made national news. Overnight, I went from a disgraced officer to something of a folk hero. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out to apologize or congratulate me. Job offers poured in from private security firms and intelligence contractors. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who'd taken down her own corrupt sister. But the strangest moment came a week after the arrests. When I received a package at my coffee shop, inside was my father's watch. The Omega that had been on Victoria's wrist. There was a note with it, written in Victoria's distinctive handwriting. I was wrong. About everything. "I'm sorry" doesn't cover it. And I know you'll never forgive me. But I need you to know that Father would have been proud of you. Not me. He always was. And I hated you for it. Keep the watch. You earned it. Victoria. I sat in my empty coffee shop long after closing, holding that watch and thinking about everything that had happened. Victoria was facing 20 years in federal prison. Her career was destroyed. Her reputation in ruins. Part of me felt vindicated. But another part, a part I didn't like to acknowledge, felt sad. She was still my sister. The rivalry between us had been so consuming that she'd been willing to destroy me to win. And in the end, she destroyed herself instead. I strapped the watch onto my wrist. It was heavier than I'd expected. The weight of history and legacy and everything it represented. Father had worn this watch through Vietnam, through decades of service, through retirement. It had been his father's before that, passed down through generations of military service. And now it was mine. Not because I'd climbed higher than Victoria. Not because I'd proven myself more worthy. But because I'd refused to let injustice stand. Because I'd fought for the truth even when it cost me everything. The next morning, I opened the daily grind like always. But this time, I put up a new sign next to the menu board. It was simple. Just a small frame with a few words. Captain Bernice Harper. USAF Ret. Honor restored. Customers asked about it, and I told them the story. Or at least parts of it. Some already knew from the news. Others were hearing it for the first time. But all of them seemed to understand something important. That justice isn't always swift, but it's worth fighting for. That betrayal doesn't define you unless you let it. That sometimes the hardest battles are with the people who should love you most. Tom came by that afternoon, grinning as he ordered his usual black coffee. "So, what's next for you, Captain? Going to ride this wave of fame into a new career?" I looked around my little coffee shop, at the mismatched chairs and the temperamental espresso machine and the customers who came in every day for their caffeine fix and a friendly face. This place, this life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. It was mine. I'd created it without anyone's help or approval. And I liked it. You know what I said? I think I'm going to stay right here. Make coffee. Maybe write a book about this whole insane experience. Live my life on my own terms. Not anyone else's. Tom raised his coffee cup in a toast. To living on your own terms. And to taking down corrupt diplomats. You know, if you ever want help with that book, I've got some stories about our Paris adventure that would make great material. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that felt like releasing years of tension. I'll keep that in mind. That night, after closing, I sat at the counter and opened my laptop. I started typing, telling my story from the beginning. Not for fame or money or vindication, but because I needed to process what had happened. Because maybe, just maybe, someone else out there was going through something similar. Someone who'd been betrayed, who'd lost everything, who felt like justice was impossible. I wanted them to know that it wasn't. That sometimes you have to create your own justice. That sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything one more time. That honor isn't something someone gives you or takes away. It's something you carry inside yourself. And nobody can touch it, unless you let them. 3 months later, Victoria's trial began. I was called as a witness, and I testified about everything. The conspiracy, the frame-up, the years of suffering. Victoria sat at the defense table in a plain suit, so different from her usual designer clothes. She didn't look at me during my testimony. When it was her turn to speak, her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim too. Someone who'd been manipulated by Claude Rio, who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to be destroyed. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did I. She was convicted on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, the judge gave her 15 years in federal prison. Victoria cried as she was led away, and for a moment, I felt that stab of sisterly compassion again. But then, I remembered the 3 years I'd lost, the shame I'd carried, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering why my life had fallen apart. I remembered my father dying without knowing I'd been innocent. And the compassion faded. After the trial, reporters asked me if I felt justice had been served. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Justice isn't about revenge, I finally said. It's about truth. The truth came out. That's what matters. Not the prison sentence. Not the public humiliation. Just the truth. And now I can finally move forward without that weight on my shoulders. So here's the thing I want you to understand. If you've made it this far in my story, betrayal by someone you love is one of the deepest wounds you can suffer. Whether it's a family member, a partner, a friend, someone who uses your trust against you, it changes you fundamentally. You have a choice when that happens. You can let it destroy you. Let it make you bitter and broken. Or you can choose to fight back. Not with the same weapons they used against you, but with truth and determination and an unwillingness to accept injustice. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were days during those 3 years when I wanted to give up, when the shame and anger felt like too much to carry. There were nights when I questioned whether pursuing justice was worth the risk of losing what little I'd rebuilt. But I'm glad I kept going. I'm glad I didn't let Victoria's betrayal be the final word on my story. Because now, when I look at my father's watch on my wrist, I don't see the symbol of her victory over me. I see proof that truth matters, that honor can be restored, and that sometimes the person you become after betrayal is stronger than the person you were before. My coffee shop is thriving now. Some of that is the publicity from the trial, but most of it is because I've learned to pour everything I am into this work. Just like I did with my military career. I've hired 2 employees, both of them veterans, who were struggling to find their place in civilian life. We understand each other in a way that doesn't need words. They know what it's like to have your identity stripped away, to have to rebuild from nothing. And together, we've created something good. Tom still comes by every few days. He's working on writing his own version of what happened. From the hacker's perspective, we joke about selling the rights to Hollywood, about who would play us in the movie. It's easier to laugh about it now that it's over. General Morrow sent me a letter from France, congratulating me on my victory and inviting me to visit Paris again someday. Under better circumstances, I might take him up on that. Paris is beautiful when you're not conducting covert operations against your sister. As for Victoria, I hear from her sometimes. She writes letters from prison. Long, rambling things that alternate between self-justification and genuine remorse. I read them, but I don't respond. I'm not ready for that yet, and maybe I never will be. Forgiveness is complicated when the betrayal cut that deep. Maybe someday I'll be able to forgive her, to move past the anger and hurt, but that day isn't today, and I'm okay with that. Healing isn't linear, and it doesn't have a deadline. What I know now, what I've learned through all of this, is that your worth doesn't come from your rank or your job or what other people think of you. It comes from who you are when everything else is stripped away. It comes from the choices you make when the easy path is to give up or give in. It comes from fighting for what's right even when you're the only one fighting. I'm not Lieutenant Chloe Vance anymore, and I'm not Captain Vance either. I'm just Chloe, owner of a coffee shop, survivor of betrayal, and someone who refused to let injustice have the last word. So, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you? Have you ever had your life torn apart by someone else's selfishness or jealousy? If you have, I want you to know that it's not the end of your story. Justice might not look the way you expect. It might take longer than you want. But if you keep fighting for the truth, if you refuse to let the betrayal define you, you can come out the other side stronger. You can reclaim your honor, your identity, your life. You just have to be brave enough to fight for it. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have confronted your sister publicly? Would you have gone to Paris, or would you have tried a different path? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories of justice, redemption, and refusing to be a victim. Your support means everything to me, and it helps me keep telling these stories that matter. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, justice doesn't always arrive with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a small coffee shop, when you finally strap on your father's watch and realize you've won the only battle that truly mattered, the battle for your own soul.